took it down. Yeah, and it's not on the podcast. They haven't podcasted it.
Okay, gentlemen, I think we're live.
No. Anyway.
Hopefully, I'm just going to wait a couple of seconds just to see whether we appear on Vaughan TV, and indeed we do. So, welcome everyone to another exciting edition of the Magic Sandwich Show. And I know that you've all been asking, where have we been for the last couple of months, I guess. Well, firstly, we had Christmas, and I think the show should have gone out on Boxing Day, so that wasn't going to happen. And then it's just a matter of people being busy, unavailable, and whatever. And I don't think it's too bad a thing to take a break now and again. But we're back, and we should be back regularly every 2 weeks at the same time. So I'm sorry if you've missed us. I hope you have. On the show today, we have Hogtiechamp and Ozzy, two of the regulars, but we also have a special guest, Alex. Welcome to the show for the first time, Alex.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Can I invite you to tell us a little bit, or tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so I'm a philosopher by training. So I have a PhD in philosophy. I was a lecturer for a few years, although it's not what I do professionally now. I guess the reason why you've brought me on today is because I recently went on the Bible Thumping Wingnut show and talked to Matt Slick for about 2 hours on, what I think is admittedly a fairly simple logical point about the fact that his argument either committed the fallacy of false dichotomy or begging the question. And even
I can assure you it was longer than 2 hours. It was 2 hours and 33 minutes because I watched all of it, once paying full attention and once sort of like just having it on in the background. That's something we're certainly going to be coming on to. That's going to be the main topic of discussion during the course of the show, which is namely the use by the theists to use philosophy to try and justify the existence of their particular God. We're hopefully then going to get on to other issues, if we have time, which include Planned Parenthood and the effects that the cuts in that have had, in particular in Texas. That's something that Hogtie was keen to talk about. And then we may, if we have time, discuss the Centre for Medical Progress and recent developments in that case, which again, Hogtie has his finger on the pulse of that. Can I just say also that we have opened up, since we've been away, a Patreon account. And I was going to put the description or the link in the description of Vaughan TV. Vaughan TV, for some reason, won't let me into the profile page when I tried to do it an hour or so ago. It let me into everything else, but not the profile page. So I'll post it into the chat occasionally, and I'll put it in the description on YouTube. Hopefully, we're broadcasting live on YouTube. I don't know whether anyone's got that window open, but I'm never certain that it goes live on broadcast. If it doesn't, I'll just upload it from Vaughan. Now, the difference about this Patreon account is that the regulars involved didn't really think that we justified taking your money. I apologise for the movement in the background. That's one of Gog's favourite positions is up there, which is always a bit disturbing, having a Gog behind you. But there we are. Yes, we took the view that we didn't want the money, and it could be better used by being donated to MSF. I won't say MS. Well, Ozzy, say what does MSF stand for? Because you always criticise me when I pronounce it.
It stands for Medecins Sans Frontieres, Doctors Without Borders.
Also known as Doctors Without Borders. So, in effect, any pledges that are made through Patreon will all 100% will go to Doctors Without Borders, MSF. If it were possible to have the payments go direct to them, then I would have done it that way, but unfortunately it's got to go through a PayPal account and then subsequently handed over, donated to MSF. We've got one patron so far, Coctopus Prime, who helped me set it up. who kindly donated $5 per month, and the first payment of £4.75 came in yesterday. I'm being asked, have I given mod controls to someone in Vaughan chat? I can certainly do that. Let me sort that out once we get started properly. The third thing was the special guest who we've already met. Now, Alex, what we tend to do at the beginning of the show is have a news quiz to check that all the participants have been keeping their finger on the pulse of all the serious and important issues that have been in the news in the last couple of weeks. And the first question for you, gentlemen, is this: how many bananas per person are grown in the world each year?
Oh,
and please,
each year.
Please feel free to join in the chat. Do we need a moderator? Whilst you're thinking of that, someone's got 10. Someone's got it's the same person. He's gone from 10 to 100. So that's quite a wide range. And for that reason, we'll give him mod status. In fact, hang on, how do I do that?
So what was the question? How many bananas per person per year?
Yes.
Per person per year.
Oh, I don't know.
It's going to be a large number, isn't it, per year?
Yeah. I mean, well, presumably there's some cultures that they're not interested in bananas. I mean, who knows? Are bananas a popular fruit in China, for instance, where there's well over 1 billion people?
Well, I can tell you where the most bananas are eaten in the world.
My house, but
which country? America gets through. I can't remember the figure. I don't want to confuse you, but it's a bit of a shame. I knew the figure for how many were eaten in the UK, but when I looked for the equivalent in the US, it gave me it in pounds as opposed to numbers. So I decided not to pursue that. So anyway, we've got 10, 5, 100. And please, gentlemen, you look desperately concerned. This is supposed to be somewhat light, humid, and fun.
Well, okay, here's the problem. Some weeks you impose an order, and who's going to answer first.
All right,
and other weeks you expect us to blurt it out. 214.
Right. 214 from Hogtie. Well, let's go to Ozzy next.
Okay, just a wild stab. 100 per person per year on average. Yeah.
Okay, and Alex.
So I'll Price is Right move 215.
We have a policy about this.
Yeah, you're off the show.
You did the right thing, but unfortunately you went in the wrong direction.
Oh, damn.
It's actually 52.
Oh, no.
Yeah, 52 per person per year. Now,
my kids eat more than 52 bananas in a year themselves. And they're this tall. That doesn't make any sense.
That's a bad sample size you've got there, my friend.
Why have bananas been in the news this week?
Oh, can I go first? My guess, having not seen the story, apparently there's some mold. I'm going to look. What's wrong with the bananas? There's a mold or virus or
It's a fungus.
It's a fungus
that affects the Cavendish banana.
The specific Cavendish banana, which is the familiar yellow banana, and they're all.
Unfortunately, I can't take that answer because you were assisted. If anyone else wants to repeat exactly word for word what Hogtie said.
Yeah, there's a fungus. Apparently, it affects the Cavendish banana, I believe.
You're absolutely right. I won't bother with you, Ozzy. You can take a point as well. Sorry, Hogtie. Mrs. Hogtie can take a point, but unfortunately, no, you can't. You're absolutely right. 47% of all bananas are known as the Cavendish banana, which was used to replace the previous banana that was destroyed by a fungus. And now there is a new fungus. There is a new fungus that is endangering all the Cavendish bananas. Now, you'll get an extra bonus point if you can tell me why they're called Cavendish bananas.
Well, I got to say, you know what? It's almost like that thing where you get an echo.
Wife.
No, because the thing is, the thing you just said, she said word for word in 5 seconds ahead of you. It was just like getting that Vaughn echo, except it was a different voice.
Yes, that's not going to wash.
Okay, she could just do the rest of the quiz because I'm. But she did get a point for that, right? She's asking me now if she got the point.
Yes, she did get the point.
No. She can only get the point if she comes on camera. New rules.
The reason why it's called the Cavendish banana, anyone have any idea?
No.
It's something that's surprising. Not that many miles from me, there is a country estate called the Cavendish Estate. It's in Derbyshire. And the first Cavendish banana was grown there and then was exported to many places in the West, where it basically took off. So, bit of local history for me, and absolutely boring for everyone else. But there we are. You want to know which country eats the most bananas? I'll tell you what, it's an African country. If you get this, okay, South Africa, Hogtie. If you get this right, you get 10 points.
Namibia.
Ozzy?
I would have guessed the United States, actually.
No, I said it's in Africa.
Oh, I missed that. Okay. Wait, America is not in Africa?
Oh, switch to geography now.
Oh, I don't. Morocco.
Uganda. So there we go. Now, sticking on the subject of bananas, don't worry, Alex, we do get to the serious points fairly soon. Sticking on the subject of bananas, there is a world record for the number of bananas eaten in within 30 minutes. What is the figure? And we'll take it the opposite way round this time. Ozzy, you go first.
Holy smokes. In how long?
30 minutes.
30 minutes. How many bananas could you consume? 30 minutes. Oh, jeez.
And although it won't help you at all, the record holder comes from India. I told you it wouldn't help you at all.
These. It sounds impossible, but I'm gonna say 80. But these
Okay.
food
Ozzy
consumption things are terrifying, so I'm gonna say 80.
There, yep.
Ozzy says 80. Okay. What do the audience? 40 and 200 we got from the audience. Hogtie.
Oh, I was going to say 41 was my initial guess.
41.
My daughter's eaten 7 in one day. That's her record.
Alex?
Well, for some reason, I'm actually trying to think about it. I guess
what was the tactic? What was the tactic that you used last time?
Well, yeah, okay. So should I go higher or lower? So Hogtie did 41, right? And Ozzy
Hogtie
did 80.
40 or 80.
All right, 79.
Oh dear, that's so unfortunate. 81 is the answer.
Oh, really?
So close.
And I won't bother asking you, but 5 billion bananas are eaten each year in the United Kingdom, which is not that many per person, is it? No, it's not. Well, actually, it is. Right. And if you know the answer to this, because it's obviously a very topical question, and you're likely to, as I say, have your finger on the pulse, it's not advisable, Alex, to shout out like Hogtie did, "Oh, I know the answer to this," because then everyone else will say the same. There is a limit to the number of playing cards that it is legal to possess in Thailand. How many playing cards are you allowed legally to possess in Thailand? We'll start with Hogtie. Let's see what the audience is.
54.
I can see the logic behind that, Hogtie. Alex.
Let's say 220.
Ozzy.
Well, I'm going to go with the same logic that Hogtie had, but I'm going to go with 52. We're excluding the jokers. One deck of playing cards.
I feel it's only fair to say that jokers are included in the number that you're allowed to possess.
Okay. Okay. Well, then I want to go with 54 as well.
Okay.
Well, no, you can't because
You
I'm
can't.
not allowed?
No. So either you go somewhere between 54 and 220, or you go 221.
Okay, no, 104. You're allowed 2 decks. There we go.
104.
Yeah.
You're still not counting. You're still not counting the jokers, though, are you?
No,
108,
108,
but his math is-
108. Yeah, my math is just terrible. So 108. There you go.
it's-
Final answer. Final answer.
Final answer. It's not bad. It's not bad, and you get another point. You'd think it was a multiple of 54.
Yeah.
It's in fact 120. which is 2 decks and 16 jokers. The one thing I wasn't able to find out is what is the penalty for possessing more than 120. But there we go. Moving quickly on, we will get to the serious points quickly. Alex, this could be a good one for you. The English Channel is a body of water that separates England from France, and at its narrowest point, it is about 22 miles across. And many people swim across it. The first time it was done, I think, was 1903. But last week, a record was set. The youngest person ever to swim across the 22 miles of the English Channel. His age was... Alex.
For some reason, I think that he was 9.
9.
Why did he get to go first?
Hogtie.
I was going to say 9. Literally, I was.
You can't.
Oh, I'll go with 10.
Okay.
Well, that defines the strategy very well. I'll go with 11.
Ozzy, you are so fortunate you were in last place. 11 is the correct answer. So again, in relation to swimming the English Channel, how many more people have swum the English Channel than have climbed Mount Everest? We'll go reverse order this time, so Ozzy goes first.
Wow, that's really weird. You know, I know that people climb Everest all the time. There's a tourist industry involved in it, but it never occurred to me that people might regularly be swimming the Channel. I never would have thought that there were more people swimming the Channel than climbing Everest.
I didn't say that the number had to be greater than 1.
Well, yeah, I didn't. I would have thought it was significantly less, though.
Well, you're... I
think
can't
it's.
give too much away.
I think it's a trick question. I think that there are, in fact, fewer people who swim the Channel than summit Everest.
Yeah, as I said, the number doesn't have to be greater than 1, so it could be less people swim the Channel.
Okay, well,
if so, what fraction? If indeed you think it's less.
I'll say 100 fewer.
100 fewer, okay. You don't want to do it as a percentage or a fraction?
I presume the answer has to be expressed that way.
I'm confused by the metric too.
Geez.
Well, let me put it the other way around.
10%.
Okay, it was a trick question. There are more people that have climbed Everest than have swum the Channel. So, put that way, how many more people have climbed Everest than have swum the Channel?
100 times more.
100. Okay. Hogtie.
I'd say easily 50 times more, but then Ozzy with 100. I'll stick with 50 times.
Alex.
Okay, well, I'll go 49 times more then. In that case.
Alex, I like the way you're playing this game. And
Mockery of the whole system.
You've pulled it off, even though you're miles away. You've pulled it off. The answer is actually around 3 times more. 1,426 people have swum the Channel. 4,042 have climbed Mount Everest.
How many
I
swim the
thought
Channel?
that was really quite odd. Because
How many swim the Channel?
1,426.
Oh, I never would have expected. I never expected it would be that many.
Really?
Wow.
I thought I would have thought more people would swum the Channel. I would have thought swimming the Channel was easier than climbing Everest. But it's obviously not something as impressive as to put on your CV, I guess. I don't know. All right.
Well, the view's not as good.
Final question. Public speaking is one of the 5 top phobias that people have. 3 of the others begin with S. What are they? Shout them out. Whoever goes.
Spiders.
Yes.
Spiders must be
Snakes.
Yep. Snakes. What's the point each?
Sex.
For some people, I imagine it might be.
I find it terrible.
Scorpions.
Sorry. What was that?
Scorpions.
No.
Sharks. Yeah, sharks. Obviously.
No. No one's going to get this. Small spaces, which is kind of claustrophobia, really. I'm not happy with the way it was worded. And there's one more. Shout it out. It begins with H.
Heights.
I think, Alex, you've won. For a first timer on the show.
Yay.
I think we give all the marks to you. But in a way, we're all winners, aren't we? Hogtie, your camera's gone off. Okay, let's get down to the serious stuff. Now, I joined YouTube, I think around 2006, 2007. And one of the first videos I ever saw, we'll just have to wait for Hogtie. I'm sure he'll come back. One of the first videos I ever saw was of Kent Hovind. And I honestly didn't know whether it was a joke or not. I just had never come across creationists and the sort of arguments that scientific arguments, in inverted commas, that he was producing. And what I've noticed in that time, since then, is that theists tend not to use scientific arguments anymore on YouTube because they've been utterly demolished by people who actually know stuff about science. What we've found now, I'm just getting a message from Hogtie. For some reason he's dropped out, and I don't know whether I need to add him in or whether he can rejoin himself. He's just typing to me. Anyway, let me carry on. The theists seem to have stopped using scientific arguments anymore, and there's definitely been a recent trend to use what I would call philosophical arguments to prove the existence of their particular god or gods. And this is sort of like, I think, certainly with the likes of me who are philosophically illiterate, has come as a bit of a troublesome approach, because being philosophically illiterate, I don't know how to approach these points that are being made, and I don't. It's like that. You just know there's something not quite right with the point that's being made, but you don't know how to express it or to eke out the sophism in the argument itself. Which is why we have Alex, and also hopefully Hogtie and Ozzy will be able to contribute as well. But let's just start, if I can, with you, Alex. As you said before, you had a recent discussion with Matt Slick, and I'm kind of presuming that most people who are watching the show know who Matt Slick is. He's had quite a few debates and does a lot on YouTube, in particular recently on Bible Thumping Wingnut's show. Just before we go into the detail of what was discussed with you in your discussion, between you and your discussion, just give us your views about your overview of the whole thing. In particular, whether you think that there is this trend of theists using philosophical arguments as opposed to scientific ones.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, I do think that you're identifying a real trend. I would probably nuance it slightly differently to the way that you did, but only because it's not like there have only just started to be philosophical arguments to prove the existence of God. Of course, it may be that they are. It may be that the YouTube is suddenly showing a resurgence of philosophical as opposed to scientific arguments for the existence of God. But people have been arguing in a philosophical context that God exists all the way back to the entire history of philosophy. Really, it's as old as philosophy is. I think Plato said something like everything is made of gods, or something along those lines. Aristotle has the first cause argument. We were talking before the show started of Thomas Aquinas, who famously had 5 proofs that God existed, and St. Anselm came up with this ontological argument, and we're talking 10th, 11th century. So there's a long and sort of venerable history of philosophy relating to proving that God exists rationally. What I would say is that there's been a recent trend in, I would say, apologetics, like the presuppositional apologetics, is something that's, while they try and say that it goes back to the Book of Acts or something, really it's something that originates around the beginning of the 20th century, at least the early 20th century, with, although he's not the sole originator of the idea, you trace a lot of these lines of thought back to Van Til, Cornelius Van Til. And so he's a guy, early 20th century. He's essentially like a kind of continental philosopher. So he's not someone who's, I don't think he actually had any training in philosophy as such, and he's not like a rigorous logic kind of formal philosophy guy. He's the sort of person, I suppose this would probably be hard to understand unless you've done a course in philosophy, but there are people like Heidegger and Sartre or whatever, this continental school, who are incredibly difficult to get inside. The vocab's very complicated and very esoteric. They don't try and give you easy definitions for things, and this carried forwards into the later half of the 20th century in this postmodernist movement where you've got people like Foucault and Derrida and stuff, and it's very, very maddeningly difficult to get into. Cornelius Van Til should be situated in this type of area. I mean, he's in a certain type of philosophy, but it's not what most English-speaking universities would be teaching on their main part of the curriculum. What they're teaching is analytic philosophy, and there has in fact been a resurgence of Christian thought in analytic philosophy too, with people like Alvin Plantinga and Richard Swinburne and I don't know, a whole host of other people who are like easy to pick up and read. There may be logic involved in it, but they're not going to be using their own vocab for stuff or whatever. So anyway, I suppose what you were in particular talking about was the use of philosophy in sort of street level engagements between Christians and atheists. That's right, isn't it?
That's pretty much so. I mean, I reiterate the fact that I am philosophically illiterate. So imagine that you're talking to a first-year undergraduate in their first lesson in philosophy. I'm sure the audience is more educated than I am. But what I thought would be perhaps constructive is if we start with the issues that were raised between you and Matt Slick, and then go on to other popular arguments, philosophical arguments, and I'm thinking in particular of the 5 that are used by William Lane Craig if he's got a 20-minute opening, and the 7 if he's got a 30-minute opening. But we'll come on to those. But one of the ones I hear frequently, and it was, as I said, I did watch the entire discussion you had with Matt, and one of the issues was one that we, again, commonly hear, which relates to the laws of logic, and whether they could exist without there being some sort of God, again, in inverted commas. Now, I'd like, if you may, to talk us through that argument, the way it's presented by Matt Slick, and what you thought were the problems with it, and if you could, in doing so, address this fact, because when Matt Dillahunty had his debate with Seitem Rugenkate, Matt Dillahunty seemed to be accepting that there were objective laws of logic, and how does that fit into the discussion?
Yeah. Okay. So, well, let's start with the transcendental argument, because this is what presuppositionalists approach. This is their distinctive argument. I mean, they have a kind of style which is to just, it's supposed to be that you never give any ground in your discussion with the atheist. That there's no neutral fact upon which you can agree. The line is that everybody's arguing from their own set of presuppositions. It's as if everyone's sort of on their own remote desert island, sort of looking across the sea at one another, and they can never really there's no shared ground that they can both stand upon. Now, that in itself is a claim which has to be agreed upon for the presuppositional approach to be put out there in the first place. So it's already, it seems to me, there's some kind of bait and switch between saying, well, there's this middle ground, which is the fact that there is no middle ground. And once you will agree with me on that, now we're setting us up so that we're completely opposed to one another, and we can't agree on any particular matter of fact. It just seems to me that that's already just wrong. I mean, an atheist and a theist agree on all sorts of things, like what time of day it is, what color it is that allows the traffic to move through the traffic lights, whatever. There's all sorts of neutral facts that we shouldn't see as being completely obliterated in this sort of interpretational wilderness that they want to put it in. But anyway, that's how that's a presuppositionalist has this kind of like radical starting point that there's no common ground between us. But then what they do is, the idea is supposed to be, for Van Tillians anyway, that what you do is you don't just sort of take your presuppositions and argue against your opponent using them or something. So, I mean, if you're an atheist, you might say something like, well, look, miracles are kind of impossible by definition, or they're the least likely possible things that could happen. So as an explanation for an event like the historical evidence for Jesus, it's just sort of, it couldn't possibly be an explanation that's helpful. And the Van Tillian presuppositionalists will say something like, well, on that you're just now not allowing yourself to see those facts using my presuppositions. My presuppositions, I already think that God exists, and I know that God exists. I'll say it's really not an unlikely or extraordinary claim to say that God would want to raise Jesus. I mean, that makes perfect sense. There's nothing extraordinary about that at all. The only reason that you can't see this evidence as being clear and straightforward evidence because of your presuppositions that you're bringing towards it. So the idea is supposed to be that if you don't give up your presuppositions, you'll never be able to see the facts the right way or something. So that the Van Tillian idea is supposed to be, show the atheist that when he looks at the world with his presuppositions, it doesn't make sense on its own terms, and then show them, hop on over into my world and see that everything does make sense on the way that I'm explaining things, and that itself is supposed to be evidence that the Christian worldview is true. And there's all sorts of issues with that as a methodology. The technical term for this is doing an internal critique, right? What you're doing is leaving your presuppositions at the door and hopping into their world and showing that on its own terms it doesn't make sense. Now, it's just a fancy way of describing a perfectly ordinary way of looking at somebody's argument. I mean, most philosophers would say, we'd be trained to quite happily drop our presuppositions. We don't just wander into arguments bringing the baggage of all of our kind of worldview, in inverted commas, when we're analysing things. I mean, if I'm looking at somebody else's argument, I'm just going to try and look at the argument on its own terms, as neutrally as possible. And so there's some issue about whether or not this internal critique really is a kind of novel way of doing things at all. It's just the normal way that philosophers would talk to one another about arguments or something. Anyway, the claim, at least made by Van Tillian presuppositionalists, will be something like, only by having belief in the biblical worldview, believing that the Christian God exists, and all of the other related kind of matters of doctrine, only if you hold those things as true, as kind of like the anchoring foundation point, only if that's there will the rest of human experience make sense. So once you have a belief in the Christian Trinitarian God, then that gives you a kind of satisfying and full explanation of, say, why logic exists. That's the claim. If you look at it from the atheist's point of view, if you hop on over into the atheist's worldview, then it's supposed to be that you're in this like barren, desolate wasteland intellectually, where, well, the idea is supposed to be, but well, we think that there's only material entities. The world is devoid of supernatural, intelligent, creative power or something. And then when we try and say, well, so we will make an argument, say a philosophical argument that uses certain principles of logic, that we are in effect trying to help ourselves to something that we don't have the conceptual resources within our worldview to be able to help ourselves to, which is why you find presuppositionalists to say something like, well, you're borrowing from my worldview when you make this argument.
Yes, I've heard that. Just two questions in relation to it. The first is an observational point. I don't know whether you did it by accident or design, but you have positioned yourself almost perfectly behind a circular mirror that gives you the impression of having a halo around you.
I don't have a halo.
No, it's moved.
It's better.
But the way in which Slick was presenting the argument.
Yes. Okay. I didn't get onto that, did I?
Yeah. You had quite a lengthy conversation about what you refer to as his syllogism, with the two premises in his conclusion, and the fact that the conclusion was contained in the one of the two premises. Could you talk us through how he presents the argument and what's wrong with it?
Well, okay. So Slick says, as a way of I'm just going to back up very slightly, but I think this will make it clearer that the Transcendental Argument says, premise one, it says God is the necessary precondition for the intelligibility of, in this case, logic. Now, those words, necessary precondition for the intelligibility of, is a long string of complicated words that are philosophical in their usage. And if you're not a philosopher, it's very difficult to understand what those things mean. It's like if somebody just starts talking about, I don't know, not being a chemist or something, but strings of nucleotides or, I don't know, hydrocarbons or something. If you don't know what they're talking about, then you would maybe just accept that maybe these guys do know what they're talking about because they're using these long string of words. Now, all being a necessary precondition of something just means it's a necessary condition. It just means that it's something that's required for something else to exist. So, this is a form of transcendental argument that can be used for anything. It doesn't have to be used for God, and it doesn't have to have logic as its subject matter. And Slick uses the word transcendentals, like logic, the principles of logic are transcendentals, as if that's why it's a transcendental argument. All the transcendental argument really is saying if X is the necessary precondition for Y, and Y is true, then X must be true as well, because X is required for Y. So, for instance, if having two legs is a necessary precondition for being able to ride a bicycle, and if you see somebody who's riding a bicycle, you can infer from that he must have two legs. And so that's all it is. It's just running backwards from a fact to the preconditions that are required for that fact to be true. If it's true, then whatever is required to make it true must also be true. That's a transcendental argument. Now, Slick thinks that he's kind of supporting the claim that God is a necessary precondition for logic by saying that you've got two. He says there's only two ways you could explain logic. It's either accounted for by God, or it's accounted for by, well, this is where the disagreement between us came in. Really, he's saying, look, either it's the Christian worldview or it's the atheist worldview. And the atheist worldview, like I was saying before, when you have this, like it seems to be bereft of these metaphysical sort of parts which would allow you to have transcendental objects in it. And so therefore the atheist worldview, it seems, can't have logic in it. And that's what he's trying to. He's trying to just rehearse this Van Tillian argument. But the way that he puts it is that there's only two ways to account for logic. It's either God or not God. That's him saying the atheist perspective, right? Not God. And then he's saying, well, look, the atheist perspective can't account for it. And if you try and say, well, look, maybe logic is, some kind of feature of language or something. He has a script which is, is there Spanish logic? Is there Italian logic? It's obviously not, language dependent. So therefore that doesn't work. Or if you try and say, well, maybe it's conceptual, it's something to do with my mind that makes me see things that way. When he said, well, then you'd have your way of thinking about it, I'd have my way of thinking about it. It would be like relative, but it's not. It seems to be absolute. So that doesn't work either. So it has this kind of, anyone who's watched Matt Slick will be familiar with this kind of routine where the atheist seems to be, anytime he tries to offer any explanation, Slick's got some kind of slick explanation of why that won't work. And then the conclusion is, well, because the atheist one can't account for this thing, it must be the God option that accounts for it. So it's kind of like an argument by elimination. There has to be, the first premise is there can only be two options. One of those options isn't the case. Therefore, it's the other one, the remaining option. That's what he wants to know. And essentially, that's an argument form known as disjunctive syllogism, which is from the really basic, most kind of simplest logical system, propositional logic. That just says if premise one is a disjunction, an option between P or Q, if that's the first premise, P or Q, and then the second premise is not P, then the conclusion is Q. and that's a valid argument form. If you just set it out like that, that works. And his way of looking at it is that the first premise is a disjunction between two options, God and atheism, say, but he, to fend off the suggestion that maybe there's another option, it's not just the Christian God or the atheist worldview, of course, there's like, what about the Hindu worldview, what about the Muslim worldview, whatever, all of these other options. You could essentially call the disjunction false. You could say, look, that's not true, this initial starting point. He actually gets that confused with the fallacy of false dichotomy, which is very closely related. But it's not just having a false disjunction as the first premise. The fallacy of false dichotomy is claiming that a disjunction is a dichotomy, and a dichotomy is a logical distinction. It's either P or not P. It by definition covers all options. So a dichotomy has to be true because by definition one of the two options that it sets out has to be true. Either P or not P has to be true. So then the claim P or not P is true by definition. So the essence of the false dichotomy fallacy is you're saying, well, either Christianity or atheism, and then you're smuggling it in as if, well, that's just P or not P, right? That's just God or not God. So you can't deny God or not God. And that's, again, you're using the force of that tautology to sort of buttress the claim that either Christianity or atheism. See, that's the fallacy.
Could I ask a stupid, what may appear to be a stupid question, and then I'm obviously Hogtiechamp and Ozzy, if you want to jump in as well, please do so. I simply don't understand the first premise at all. I don't see why it has any truth value to it at all. I don't see why the necessity of a deity of whatever flavour requires laws of logic. To me, it seems, and this again maybe sound incredibly stupid to someone as well versed in philosophy as you are, but the laws of logic, and much like the laws of mathematics, whilst I suppose you could argue to some extent they seem to be objectively true, they're man-made constructs. Would you argue that some of the laws of logic float around in the ether without any sentient entity to interpret them? Is that a stupid question?
It's not at all. It's well, it's very difficult to know where to start with that, because
I think you're being polite. It probably was a stupid question, wasn't it?
It isn't a stupid question, because it's just a very, very difficult question to answer. It's a very, very difficult thing to get your head around in any sense. There is a sense in which that logic is entirely a man-made creation. So for instance, there is a history of logic, and logic didn't arrive fully formed, although there was a kind of prejudice around Immanuel Kant thought that Aristotle invented logic, all of logic, all at the same time, and there was nothing else to be added to it. I think he said something like, logic hasn't taken a step forward nor a step back since Aristotle. But that's just flatly not true. Kant was unaware of the kind of rich and interesting history that logic has had. So Aristotle invented a certain type of logic, syllogistic logic, and over the Aegean, the Stoic logician Chrysippus invented the basic building blocks of propositional logic. And then in the medieval period, there were developments in what we call intentional logic, which is like, so when you say something, not just the proposition that's true, but if you prefix a proposition with saying something like, I believe that P, then the logical properties change completely. So there were developments in the medieval period. And then in the modern age, we sort of, it's kind of credited to Frege, although Charles Sanders Peirce and George Boole also played very important parts of this. But they kind of, logic went up a level, massively upgraded, to the point where like the Chrysipian propositional logic and the Aristotelian syllogistic logic were seen to simply be two aspects of a kind of deeper logical structure that we understood in incredibly much more detail. There were like technical developments in notation, really, that enabled us to be able to express more clearly logical relationships. I won't go into much more detail because I think it would just probably be quite boring if I did. But so what I'm saying is that in a sense, logic changed, because logic used to just be the Aristotelian idea and the Chrysippan idea, and then it went through this history. So yes, it is a man-made creation. You can point to the figures in history who added bits to logic, and it's still undergoing developments. There's original ideas in logic coming forwards now. So in a sense, it is a man-made creation. But on the other hand, there's a sense in which it's not like, I mean, so if you're making an argument that's valid, so if I say, I don't know, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. This is a kind of classic example of a syllogism that's used in page 1 of your Introduction to Logic textbook would have this on there. Now, that's valid. That argument is valid. It shows if the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. And there's no way around that. There's no, well, maybe if it's raining, then maybe it won't be true, or something like that. It's not dependent on any feature of the world. And really, you can see, I think, that even if no one was around to make that argument, it would still be valid. It doesn't have to be anything in existence. It would still be valid. It doesn't depend upon anything. So in a sense, it's independent of people. I mean, that's not to say that it's floating free somewhere out in space, of course, but it's an abstract relationship between between the premises and the conclusion. That's all that we're talking about here. It's just a relationship. It's a kind of, you like the way that you can say, well, 2 + 2 = 4. Like, yeah, I don't actually have to add 2 oranges and 2 apples to get 4 bits of fruit. Right? That does work like that. But even if there's nothing to add, it would still be the case that 2 + 2 = 4. So I think that really it seems more intuitive to me that the actual kind of underlying reality that logic points towards is independent of men, not a construct of humans.
I sense from body language that Hogtie is desperate to jump in.
See, everything you just said, I'm amused by, because everything you just said was the reason that my first conversation with Matt Slick went just abysmally. He'd asked me very early on in the conversation something like, well, do you ascribe to the laws of logic? And I was like, well, what does that even mean? Like, the laws of logic need my permission or consent to apply. And then he was like, well, where do they come from? Are they man-made or whatever? So I said, well, no, I mean, the laws of logic are man-made. The rules of calculus for how we do these manipulations, these things are obviously man-made. What I think you're asking about, if what you're going for here is the TAG, or as I call it, the Transcendental Argument from Ignorance, what you're really, thanks for, you can steal that. What you're really looking for here is these underlying verities, like whatever you want to call. I mean, actually, I just noticed a comment by the Rumpus here in the chat about how when they talk about the laws of logic, specifically Slick, there are only 3 things, right? Law of identity, law of non-contradiction, law of the excluded middle. Those are the things they refer to as the laws of logic. I said, well, the formulation of that, the construction of that, the calculus that follows from having those rules, those are man-made constructs, the same way that clock arithmetic is man-made. But I would always concede, I would say, but I understand what you're asking me. You're asking me about the underlying logical verities, about a thing being the thing and not being not the thing. And yes, of course, I agree with that. So please go on to your second point. Could never happen. Never happened. He simply, until I was going to say those words, God created the laws of logic, there would be no step 2 to that discussion. They eventually just kicked me off the show.
Yeah.
There's something interesting about their adoption of the expression laws of logic, because people who work in philosophy, philosophers of logic, logicians, don't often talk about laws of logic. They sometimes do, but not often. Typically, they'll talk about principles of logic and inference rules, axioms of logic, things like that. And things like the principle of identity, the principle of the excluded middle, principle of non-contradiction. I mean, these are the enabling assumptions that get logic moving. I mean, those aren't rules of logic. Rules of logic are things like modus ponens and disjunctive syllogism and things like that. Those are inference rules of logic, right? So the 3 laws of logic that they talk about are not, strictly speaking, rules or laws of logic in any sense. But in any case, it's okay. We don't need to quibble about the word laws. But I think there's a reason why they like to use the word laws. They like to talk about these things as laws because laws, in ordinary usage, are things that we come up with, right? They are, like traffic laws, right, and contract law and things like that, right? These are things that we declare. We make them so, right? And they want to imagine that reality that is describable by logic follows laws. And they imagine that just as the laws of nature are laws written by God, these are not just descriptions of regularities in the world. Like laws of nature are whatever else they are at least descriptions of reality, right, of the regularities that we find in the world. They like to think of natural laws, right, the laws of physics and chemistry, for instance. They want to think of those as stipulations, declarations. God has ordained that the world will function this way, just like we declare that traffic will flow this way and that these will be the rules, that red means stop and green means go. And you have to drive on the right side and pass only on the left in North America, and the reverse in the UK, right? So they like to model logic on this idea of law, of a commandment, a directive from God that makes reality the way it is. I think that's why they adopt that use of the word logic. And the bind that Slick was trying to put you in, Hogtie, in that conversation, in which he tries to deploy with everyone he talks to when he's having this discussion, is it stems from a confusion in his own mind, as I see it, between logic as a human undertaking, something that we have discovered, as Alex was just describing, right, from Aristotle and others onwards, a description of certain relationships and verities, right? I mean, logicians don't just invent logic and say, here, I've invented these inference rules, and this is it. This is how it's going to go from now on. No, I mean, you wouldn't be able to convince anybody of that, right? I mean, there is the undertaking, the enterprise of logic, the inference rules that we have come up with and invented, and the systems that we have come up with. But there are also the verities, as you said, that are referred to and described by these laws that we've come up with. And so when when Slick is actually talking about laws of logic, I think he's actually equivocating. He's asking you, how do you explain that there are these verities, like everything is what it is and not some other thing? That's true, right? I mean, everything is what it is and not some other thing, right? The principle of identity, right? He's asking you, why should reality be this way, right? But then, of course, he also knows that we have come up with logic. And so he's sort of hoping that people will be tempted to say, well, logic is just something that we came up with, like traffic laws, right? That it's just a convention, right? But of course, we know that, no, you can't just arbitrarily decide tomorrow that the principle of non-contradiction never holds, or the principle of identity doesn't hold, or only holds some of the time, or something like that, right? Well, he knows that people don't want to say that sort of thing, right? Now, of course, there are, in fact, systems of logic, like paraconsistent logic and stuff like that, where you, in fact, would challenge things like the principle of non-contradiction, right? So things are not quite as clear-cut as he imagines. But nevertheless, I think what Slick is trying to do is get people in a trap. But in a way, I think he comes by it honestly. I think he is just deeply confused about the nature of logic, and he confuses the timeless verities that he wants to talk about with the human elaboration, discovery, and articulation of systems of rules that we use that apply and refer to those verities.
That's right.
Can you just help me out? And again, one sentence answer. I know it's difficult, but you're talking, as I say, to an illiterate. There are, and I've heard this before. I've heard Cy say it. I've heard Slick say it, and others. There are really only three laws of logic that they ever really concentrate on, which is the law of, as you say, non-contradiction, law of identity, and law of excluded middle.
Yes.
Just very briefly, what are they, one by one? Non-contradiction, what's that?
So non-contradiction just says that basically it's just saying there aren't any contradictions. I mean, that's really what it's saying. So and we put this logically by saying and then so for all propositions, let's just use P to cover all propositions. It's not the case that P and not P. So P and not P is a contradiction, which is saying it's never the case that you get both of those two together. Right?
So how is that different from the law of identity?
So the law of identity says, so the law of identity is really it's a different type of logical principle because it's not used in propositional logic at all. Identity isn't a symbol in propositional logic. You have to go up a grade of you have to be able to refer to a thing for a start. Propositional logic just refers to facts, things that are true. So P is true, right? But Ozzy isn't true. He's a person, right? But Ozzy is identical to himself, and it's true that Ozzy is identical to himself, right? So that's a proposition, but the elements of the proposition is like A equals A. So it's just saying for all things. So it's a rule of slightly more complicated logic, predicate logic, which covers things and their properties. It says for all things, they have the property of like identity, and that property is just simply that everything's identical to itself and not identical to anything that's not itself. It's a very straightforward principle. It's challengeable. I mean, like people like to go to the idea that quantum mechanics challenges it because you can have the particles being a superposition. It's both a wave and a particle at the same time. It's kind of has properties that it doesn't have or something. And I think Sartre would say that your a person is kind of as a moving through time, becoming something that it's not or whatever. It's like there is a sense in which you're not identical to yourself. You're going to become something that you're currently not. Whatever, I don't know. There's different ways that you could construe whether or not that works. There's a simple way of just saying, an object, this glass, it's kind of contained in some kind of dimension or whatever, and it is that thing, and it's not, my hand or something. They're two different things, right? Everything is identical to itself. That's the basic idea. And then the law of excluded middle just says for all propositions, so this is another rule that's like the law of non-contradiction. It just says it's either the case that P or not P, and that's just what it's ruling out is the case that there's some P where it's not true and its negation isn't true either. Like, it has to be one of those two. One of those two things has to be true. It's just saying that negation basically is the exact contrary to just an affirmation. So if I say, Ozzy is sitting in his chair, and then I consider, well, it's not the case that Ozzy is sitting in his chair. Right? One of those two sentences has to describe reality correctly. Right? It's either that he is sitting in his chair, or it's all of the other things that could possibly be, apart from Ozzy sitting in his chair. That's what the law of excluded middle says. That it's basically a rule that tells you how negation works. It's just that and there are ways of pulling those two things apart. You can have a different type of negation, which is like a maybe it would be too complicated to go into it, but intuitionism is a school of philosophy that looks at mathematical truths, and it says something like a mathematical truth is only true if it's been proven. And so to say P, like, I don't know, 2 + 2 = 4, that's fine if there's a proof for that statement. And not P can only be said if there's a proof that that's not true. And in this case where you don't have a proof for a mathematical equation or something, then it's neither P nor not P. So that's a way of thinking about how you can deny the law of excluded middle. They're just like, there's this P out there, and we don't know whether it holds or whether it doesn't hold. In a sense, it sort of doesn't either hold or not hold. There's just a space in between those two options. Now, classical logic has the law of excluded middle and the law of non-contradiction. Really, you don't need both. You only need one. You can get away with having one axiom to formulate classical logic. I think this Polish logician Jan Łukasiewicz formulated propositional logic in the most concise manner possible. He actually formulated with one axiom and one rule, and then what he did was showed that not only had he done it in a very concise way, he also proved that it is not possible to formulate propositional logic in a more concise way, which if you're a logician, you love that type of thing. That's like manna from heaven or something. Anyway, whatever. I'm geeking out a little bit there. So yes, have I explained those 3 rules for you?
Yes, that's absolutely fine. And
okay.
given the how quickly the time's going, and
I do tend to ramble.
That I have no problem with that at all. But there are a number of other. Oh yes, just very briefly, and I'll put the link to your discussion with Matt Slick in the description on the YouTube video, which hopefully is being sort of like uploaded live as we speak. You criticised his that logical argument and the existence of logical absolutes by saying that you might as well replace God with toast.
Yeah,
which I thought was quite funny. But
So-
well, yeah, give us a brief description of that, because there are a few other religious arguments that I want to get through before the end of the show. But give us a brief understanding of your logic or your point.
Okay, so he says either God accounts for the transcendental laws of logic, or not God accounts for the transcendental laws of logic, and not God, i.e. atheism, can't do that. Therefore, by elimination, you know that God can. Now, I said, if that argument worked, then there's no reason why the following argument wouldn't also work. Either toast accounts for the transcendental laws of logic, or not toast accounts for the transcendental laws of logic. Now, let's consider the not toast position, the atoastist. Does he have the resources to account for the transcendental laws of logic? Well, all he's saying is that there's no toast. So it seems that he's quite obviously not going to be able to account for the transcendental laws of logic. It's just a kind of silly, empty position. Therefore, toast does account for the transcendental laws of logic by process of elimination. So I'm doing a reductio ad absurdum of his. I'm parodying his reasoning, but using it to show that it can be used to also reach absurd conclusions. Right, so it's it was a way of showing that his argument is flawed. If you can plug anything in to the argument and it still works just as well, then that's a reason in itself to reject the argument form.
Hogtie, did you want to comment on that before we? Because I want to move on to other arguments for the existence of God. But if you wanted to say something before I do,
Yeah, I could probably pull one point out there at the risk of rambling, which I'll try not to do. But one thing I found really difficult about that conversation, and actually, remember, I've seen Matt Slick's argument before. In his statement of it, premise one is God or not God, and that's led to some discussion on, well, do you mean the Christian God or some other existence that doesn't involve specifically the Christian God, perhaps some other God or set of gods, or no gods at all? No, that's not what he means. It might be any God. So there's been some wrestling match on what he means by God or not God. Alex, in your phrasing of it here, you've said that his premise is either God explains whatever transcendental phenomenon, or not God explains whatever transcendental phenomenon. That's probably a more accurate telling of what he is getting at, but it's not what he says. He says God or not God is the first premise. So that's one problem. The second problem is the negation. So if you have a statement like God explains transcendental thing X, or its negation, not God explains transcendental thing X, well, where are the parentheses there? Are you saying not God, the proposition of not God, is the thing that bears the explanatory power for transcendental thing X, or are you saying not God is the thing that explains transcendental?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that was 20 minutes of your time. Was that discussion? And one thing that, for people that haven't had a chance to take logic, one thing that, I always thought that when you take a logic class, that it would be sort of like talking through some puzzles and whatnot. And I was surprised how much of it was very math-like. It was learn the symbols, sit down, write your premises out, draw a line underneath it. And if you're going to do like a reductio ad absurdum, then you got to draw a vertical line and move over an inch on the page. And you didn't move that inch over on the page. You lost marks for that because you weren't doing the math properly of logic. And there are a number of things. So that's why I touch on this point about what was he negating and then what follows from what. A lot of it has to do with Matt Slick making what I think is an earnest effort to structure an argument towards the conclusion that he desires, which is a little hinky there. But trying to frame that in English words and phrases and things that you can say when you're speaking in front of a room without first putting hand to paper, doing the symbols, sitting down and like learning how do you actually do the math on it. There were just so many points in that discussion of yours where I thought if he could just see what you were saying. And just for people who've seen it, and if you haven't seen it, you should watch it. There's a great part of the discussion where, in referring to your blog post, you had referred to one proposition as being God, and the other proposition as being, or was it P? I don't remember what it was, but the other one as being not God or not P, which you had typed NOT hyphen God or whatever the other word was, and he kept asking you what the hyphen meant. Do you remember what I'm referring to here? Where it was just this lengthy discussion. Oh, I didn't see. Oh, so the minus sign means not, but then you got not, and then a minus sign, and then the thing. And it was this. I mean, when listening to that particular show, it was absolutely bewildering. When it was like the hyphen means the same thing. It was just infuriating. It's a great moment in the show, though, as long as you weren't part of the conversation, I imagine.
I've thought about that since, and I mean, I don't. So. There's a temptation to think that like there's a stalling tactic, deliberate stalling tactic going on where it's like, well, I'll just pretend like I don't get this until he goes away or something. And I haven't really given that much credence. I don't think that's what he was doing. I don't think it's a sophisticated attempt to look stupid as a way of stalling the argument.
No, he gave you more credit. Sorry.
Well, yeah, I genuinely think that he is so entrenched in his way of thinking about it, and he has a very idiosyncratic manner altogether. It kind of reminds me of talking to other kind of like, I mean this in a nice way, but it's kind of slightly doddery old men. Do you know what I mean? Like he's not he used to be much sharper than he is now, I think, and that was the impression I got. He seemed like a nice man. He wasn't rude to me in any sense. I've heard him be quite patronizing and disparaging to a lot of people, but I explain the fact that it took him such a long time to get what is obviously quite a basic point. I pin that on not deception anyway. I just think that it's very difficult for him to come to see that.
I think he's got a great deal invested in it, hasn't he?
Yeah.
And he's not going to cast away his beliefs very easily, if at all.
Well, I mean, he won't cast them away.
I must say that although I really don't like Matzlik at all, I will be fair to him and say this. I think he was reasonably polite with you. I've seen him being very rude to other people. I don't like the person. I probably wouldn't engage with him. Well, firstly because I'm not a philosopher and I wouldn't want to get into philosophical arguments with him. But I don't really like him. But it's only fair to say that he's not here. He can't defend himself. So whilst I think it's fair to talk about the arguments he puts forward, I don't think we should go any further than that.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo. I guess he was very nice to me, and I don't have a bad feeling towards him because I'm not going around saying, "Hi, I pwned Matzlik. He's lame," and I'm not saying anything like that. I mean,
even though a lot of people are saying that.
Well, I think that actually I did refute the argument really, but that you know.
I think it's thoroughly debunked, and at many junctures too. Like if anyone cares to go to Alex's blog post, we'll supply a link. And
yes, can I just pause you there, Ozzy, just very briefly, whilst it stood in my mind. Somebody in the chat some time ago now asked for whether Alex, you had a Google Plus account that people can follow, whether you've got a blog or whether you've got a YouTube channel. We'll include, if you send them to me at the end of the show when we've finished, I'll put them into the description of the YouTube video. Okay?
Yeah.
Sorry.
My blog is called Use of Reason.
We'll put it in the description.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Absolutely.
That's fine. Ozzy, sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, what was I saying? I think the argument is sufficiently debunked now, because if you go to Alex's blog and you read just his blog entry about that particular argument, he goes through and he lists everything that's wrong with the argument. Okay, he just goes through and says, well, there's this mistake, there's a fallacy of false dichotomy here. I mean, it doesn't make sense. You can't say either God or not God. First of all, God or not God, that doesn't mean anything. You have to say either there exists a God or there does not exist a God. That's the proper way of expressing the proposition, right? That's where your dichotomy is going to have to be, your work in the dichotomy.
Can I just make sure that I understand what you're saying, Ozzy? Because it seems to me that I may have misunderstood you. Are you saying that proposition is invalid? Because it seems to me that it's valid. Either there is a God, when in fact, either there is a God or gods, or there is not a God or gods. That seems to me to be a valid statement.
No, it's perfectly all right to correct to say it's a truism to say either there exists a God or there does not exist a God, right? That is the principle of the excluded middle right there. That's an instance of the principle of the excluded middle. There's no middle ground there. There's no other alternative. But what Slick is trying to argue about is that either the existence of God is necessary for explaining the existence of logic, or is not the case that logic is, or that one can explain logic without appeal to the existence of God. But there's a third possibility, which Alex expresses in his blog, that perhaps neither can account for the existence of logic. Perhaps appealing to God or not appealing to God, by either way, will you be able to account for logic, right? It's just, it won't do to say either there's a God or there's no God. Therefore, it follows that if you can't account for logic as an atheist, therefore theism accounts for logic. That simply doesn't follow. That's why he has his example of toast or not toast. Either toast exists or toast doesn't exist, right? Does it follow that from the fact that the non-existence of toast doesn't explain the existence of logic? Does it follow that therefore the existence of toast does explain the existence of logic? No, of course not. That's ridiculous, right? And so that's one fallacy embedded in the argument. And the other is his misuse of a disjunctive syllogism, where he uses what he calls a true dichotomy, P or not P, in an argument that is supposed to take the form A or B, not A, therefore B. And so as a result of a logical error that any student of logic would recognize as an error, Slick ends up with an argument that simply asserts P, therefore P. God exists, therefore God exists. Because his argument takes this form. Either P is the case, or it is not the case that God doesn't exist. So P is God exists, not P is God doesn't exist. And then he asserts it is not the case that God doesn't exist. What does that mean, that proposition? It is not the case that God doesn't exist. That is the assertion that God exists. That's just P.
And then his conclusion is that God exists.
God exists, right. So his argument is either it is the case that God exists, or it is not the case that God exists. It is not the case that God exists, right? Therefore, God exists. But that argument is reducible to P, therefore P, right?
Yeah.
Because not P is the same thing as saying P.
Yes.
So his argument is P or not P, P therefore P.
I think even I managed to pick up that in the discussion. But as I say, given the time, let's move on, because there are another few arguments. Let's see how many we can get through. One of the favourites that many people use is the Kalam argument, which we all know, which is everything that comes into existence has a cause. The universe came into existence, therefore the universe has a cause. Now, I've got problems with both the premises, and I suppose if the premises are true, then the conclusion is true. I also have a huge issue with the conclusion somehow leading to the Christian God, which William Lane Craig takes about 5 steps to get through. But just dealing with the syllogism as it stands, is there anything about either premise 1 or premise 2 that any of you would challenge in the Kalam argument?
Well, I mean, there's fallacy, which is I can't remember the name of the fallacy now, but it's to go from just because everything which everything which is in the universe has a cause. It seems like it's a reasonable principle to assume that that's the case. Every event must have had something that made it happen, because it seems like that's the case. I mean, why does the red ball go in the pockets? Because the white ball hit it in the right place. And why did the white ball hit it in the right place? Because the snooker cue hit it correctly. Why did that happen? Because my arm moved the right way, and blah, blah, blah. You can trace these causal chains back, and it does seem intuitively obvious that you couldn't have an event which just had no cause to it whatsoever. Now, you can, of course. I mean, again, quantum physics is helpful because the decay of a nucleus happens seemingly without any cause. At random, it just randomly decays at a certain point, right? So radioactive decay is an instance of what seems very clearly to be a non-caused event. So straightforwardly, it could be false for that reason. But secondly, there's a fallacy if you say that, well, even if it's true that every event in the course of history had a cause, it doesn't mean that the totality itself has to have a cause. And so, Ozzy, what's the name of this fallacy? For some reason, it's escaping me. But you know what?
You're
muted.
Composition fallacy. Sorry, it's
composition fallacy. Right. So it's like saying that every person has a mother, therefore humanity has a mother, or something. It's like you can't. It may hold for every part, but it doesn't necessarily hold for the whole. You can't. At least it's not valid to go from it holding for every part for holding for the whole. It may be that even though every event in the course of the universe has a cause, that the entirety of the universe itself has no cause. So you can, I would probably deny the argument for either of those two reasons, I think.
Okay, before I come on to a response from either Hogtie or Ozzy, can I just say that normally I would have Twitter open, and if you wanted to ask a question, you could send it either through Twitter. You can post it into the Vaughan chat, and I know that people are keeping an eye on Vaughan. So if you've got any questions that you want to ask us, please use either of those two methods, or alternatively, as Sebastian has done, he sent me a question through Skype to the Magic Sandwich Show. We will get onto that question. I think it's a very interesting one, but it'll be later on in the show after we've discussed a few more arguments for the existence of God. But if there's any questions, you can send a Skype message to Magic Sandwich Show, all one word, on Skype, and we'll see if we can get the panel's comments on it. But Sebastian, yeah, we will. We've only got a little bit over half an hour left, maybe 40 minutes. We will get to your question in due course. Sorry, Hogtie or Ozzy, did either of you want to talk or comment on the Kalam argument?
I'll just add that, or I'll second that I would challenge both premises in the Kalam cosmological argument. It is not at all clear to me that everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. That might be true, and it's not at all clear to me that the universe had a beginning of its existence. So, I mean, that might be true too, but I mean, I think that the answer from physics and cosmology is not in on that second premise. And with respect to the first one, I mean, it's tempting to think, well, look around, as Alex said, look around, everything around you presumably has a cause. This is an enabling assumption that everything has some kind of cause or reason for its coming into existence. That's certainly true in the world. That is an assumption that we always bring in any investigation. If there's a cause to be found, you have to assume that there's a cause there to be found. And so this, I think, is an enabling assumption of all inquiry and all science. But the universe is a special case. The universe presumably is everything that is the case, everything that exists. Now, let's say that's what we mean by the universe. Okay, whatever the explanation of that is, if there is an explanation, it's sui generis. It's one of a kind. It's not going to be like some mundane explanation. I would not expect that whatever the cause of the universe is, or whatever the reason is for why the universe exists, okay, is necessarily going to be akin to why things exist in the world. You cannot just import your inductive intuitions about what goes on in the world to a case like the universe, which is one of a kind. This is just bad induction. It's bad induction to say all around me are things which, when they have come into existence, and we have been able to find an explanation why they exist. There has been a cause of their existence. That therefore, it is true of the universe itself. Who the heck knows how universes come into existence? Maybe they just spring into existence acausally for no reason at all. Maybe that's exactly the kind of thing that a universe can do, right? That can happen, right? Maybe universes can simply come into existence, right? Look, it's counterintuitive to me too, but I'm not going to bring to bear my intuitions, all of which are conditioned by what goes on in the world, where things come from other things, and say that if there were a condition of absolute nothingness, it would be impossible for something to spring from it.
Yeah.
Look, that is just an illegitimate induction that we want to apply. So I would challenge both premises. I don't think there are any good arguments to be confident in either premise.
Do you think that there is any escaping the problems that inductive reasoning has?
You mean like Hume's problem of induction and
no, Ozzy, that is so unfair, because I'm not trying I don't know what on earth you're talking about, but there's a lot of criticism about inductive reasoning, isn't it? Because
there's no reason to criticize inductive reasoning. We all use induction all the time.
I know we do, right, but are we justified in doing so?
Yeah, well, I am of the view that there is no satisfactory justification for induction. This is just the predicament that we find ourselves in. Nature doesn't owe us any reason to trust that the future will be like the past. We just do. That's what we do. We do this for the same reason cats and dogs do this, right? As a part of our evolutionary history, we assume that the future will resemble the past in relevant respects. That is what all empirical learning is based on. You just assume that the future will resemble the past in relevant respects. You project based on what has taken place in the past that the future will resemble it, and that's why if you assume that, then you can do induction. But if you call that assumption into question, oh, well, I don't know how to justify that assumption. You have a problem. We don't have a good deductive argument. We don't have any kind of deductive argument for why the future has to resemble the past. Of course, you can't use an inductive argument for why the future must resemble the past, because then you're going to be using induction to justify induction, which is a circular argument, which is begging the question, right? And that violates an epistemic norm. That's a paradigm case of a bad argument, of a fallacious argument. So now, some philosophers think that they've solved the problem of induction. Famously, Karl Popper thought that he'd found a way around the problem of induction. He actually countenanced the problem of induction, but thought there was a way around it. To explain why science works and why we can be confident about our scientific findings and such like that. But my view is, look, it's a properly basic belief that we simply take as a given that the future will resemble the past. And once you assume that, take that as an article of faith, then you can go on and do science. The fact that there is an article of faith at the very heart of things is not a license to believe any old damn thing, right? There are some things, though, that I think we do have to accept without argument. In order to be able to make arguments, in order to reason. There's a problem of deduction too. How do you justify modus ponens? How are you going to justify? What will you use to justify logical deduction? A is identical to B. B is identical to C. Therefore, A is identical to C. What rules are you going to use? What principles will you use to defend a proposition like that? Are you going to use reason? Are you going to use logic?
The transcendental laws of logic that come from the Christian God.
Well, I just gave an example of a principle of logic there. Right? What are you going to use? Are you going to use logic to justify logic? Right? That's going to be a circular argument. I mean, we have a problem of induction. It's no different in my view than the problem of deduction. This is just the predicament that we find ourselves in. What we mean by rationality is the use of certain kinds of principles. Right? Principles of induction, principles of deduction. There are others that we apply, and this is what we mean by good reasoning. And there doesn't have to be a justification behind that. We would like there to be so, but positing a God doesn't help one bit. Because any argument that you give for why there's a God that would undergird all of these things is going to have to be expressed using logic and reasoning. You're going to have to apply the very cognitive faculties that are being called into question in the justification of your cognitive faculties wherein you're invoking some God. It just seems to be a more metaphysically extravagant way of trying to of failing to justify what we would like to justify. It's just
there is a presuppositional line about this, of course, where they say, the atheist can't justify induction. But that's no problem for the Christian worldview, of course, because God in Genesis, whatever, said, I'll promise to keep the heavens revolving and the seasons will come and go as they always have done. So that means that induction is always going to work in the future. So we've got induction over here, and you guys over there in your atheist worldview, you don't have induction. Therefore, then just another reason to become a Christian, right? It seems to me it's a complete misunderstanding of the problem of induction in the first place, because the problem of induction isn't maybe the sun won't come up tomorrow. That's not the problem of induction. The problem of induction isn't that you don't know that your induction might not be true, right? That's constitutive of induction, right? You're generalizing. So, the case of the turkey who's been fed every day up until Christmas Eve, and he thinks he's going to be fed the next day, but of course he's not. He's going to be eaten the next day, right? Everyone's always in that situation every time you make an inductive argument. If you weren't in that situation, you would, by definition, be doing a deductive argument, where the conclusion follows of necessity from the premises. So it's actually part of the definition of an inductive argument that the premises don't establish the conclusion. What they do is lend support to the conclusion. So a valid inductive argument is one where the premises make the conclusion more likely to be true. That's all it is. So the problem of induction is just that we can't take that type of argument and, as Ozzy was saying, give some kind of wider reason to think that those types of arguments, that the premises can give support to those types of conclusions. It's not that maybe the conclusions will all be false and all of everything hamburgers will eat people and everyone will walk upside down tomorrow or something. That's not the problem of induction, right? We are in fact very, very secure in thinking certain things like that the sun will come up tomorrow. And the presuppositionalist answer, which is that, well, God promised that the sun's going to come up tomorrow, misses the point completely. That's not a justification of induction.
Can I just question whether the sun rising tomorrow is indeed inductive? That is to say, of course, the sun isn't going to come up. What we're saying is the Earth is going to continue to rotate. Right, yeah. And everything we know about the laws of physics tells us that the Earth is going to continue to rotate, and gravity will be the same. Is that a good example of an inductive argument?
Yeah, that's the sort of thing where the premises, we have very good reasons for thinking that the sun's going to come up tomorrow, precisely because not just it has done every day up till now, but also we have like a wider theoretical framework which explains that type of phenomena.
That's what I mean. It's because we have this wider framework, this scientific understanding, that it doesn't seem to me to be a purely inductive argument. To contrast it with something that came up with the discussion between Delahanty and Sai, was Sai asking Matt, I think, a question along the lines of, you travel along the road and the first few hundred houses are all red. What does that mean about the colour of the next house? And Matt said, well, it doesn't tell you anything. Now, I can understand that sort of inductive reasoning is totally invalid, but I just don't see whether there are grades of inductive reasoning, such as the Earth will carry on spinning, because we've got evidence to support that hypothesis, that reason. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, and so the whole point of an inductive argument is that it gives support to the conclusion, and you can quantify the support to some extent anyway. You can make up some numbers anyway to get a sense of it. So you could say that if all of the houses are red, or whatever the example was, what's the chances that the next house is going to be red? Well, I mean, if I had to bet on it, if someone put a gun to my head and said, well, what's the colour of the next house? I have some idea, I have some support for the conclusion it's going to be red, right? It's not a very good support. I'd feel very nervous about making that bet, of course, but it's not that I have no support. I have some. So it is an inductive argument. It's just a weak inductive argument. Whereas when you've got, it's every single day, I suppose it's kind of true by definition, but all these times in the past, the sun's risen or the Earth's gone around the sun, whatever. And we've got this wider theoretical framework that makes all of these things pile in together to make it, incredibly likely. So I would, if someone put a gun to my head and said, is the sun going to come up tomorrow? I'd say, yeah, quite confidently. So we can quantify our level of belief, whereas with a deductive argument, it's either valid or not. Right? It's just black and white, which one thing or the other. Whereas with an inductive argument, it's quantifiable. It's a sliding scale of confidence.
And again, if I judge Hogtie's body language right, he's jumping, get ready to jump in. I have to step away for 2 minutes.
Well, I was going to say that the way that they typically phrase it, I'm sure you've encountered this. You're familiar with it. Is it they're saying, well, how would you justify the fact that you could use induction? And they'll use the phrase like, are you using induction to justify induction?
Yeah.
And from there, they make the next sort of leap to where if you ever make the admission that, well, no, these things are not subject to deductive proof. I say these things because I'm trying to expand this point into many other areas where they do this. So, for example, solipsism, they'll say, well, what's your, you explain to me why, how you know that there are, no, they don't mean justify true belief. They mean, how do you have your certainty that other minds exist? How can you be 100% confident other minds exist? And you say, no, I don't have a deductive argument that leads to there being minds other than my own. And then from that, they will infer, conclude, or push upon you that you're saying, well, I just don't even know if there are other minds. It just could be, it's just me, maybe I'm God. I don't know, I have no idea. And you find that as soon as you give up that ground where you say, and as you should, because unless you do have a deductive proof that defeats solipsism, you shouldn't claim that you do. But as soon as you say, yeah, no, I don't have a deductive proof for solipsism, they're going to say, oh, well, so then you think you're the only mind. No, I never said that. Oh, well, then you just don't know if you're the only mind in the whole world. Well, no, actually, I do have good support for the idea that, I just don't have a deductive argument that leads to it. And they will not proceed in the argument until, they say they're thrusting upon you this idea that you just have no clue what's going on. As you say, maybe hamburgers will eat people. They do that for several areas, not just induction or solipsism.
It basically, the whole technique is to try and induce a sense of philosophical vertigo so that you don't know what you're saying next. And then pounce upon that and say, oh, well, what you need to do is pray and believe in Jesus. And then all of these worries that you've got will go away. All of the philosophical problems that you're wrestling with will just be magically solved by believing in God. And, having that sense of philosophical vertigo is an exciting and kind of liberating phenomenon that happens when you start thinking about these things. And if you never do that, it's a strange and unusual feeling, and you might not know what to do. But to just shut your mind and say, well, I'm just going to believe in a series of doctrines that just chanting and reciting some mantra about there being three persons and in one or something, as if that's going to solve some deep philosophical problem. It's just wishful thinking at the end of the day. There's no escaping the fact that you have to be rational and try and sort these things out as best as you can. You have to call it as you see it.
That's an absolutely excellent point, because I'll tell you, as I've reflected on these issues, as I've sort of re-engaged them only in the last year, I remember that there was a time in my life when I completely understood epistemology, completely understood what knowledge was based on. I was about 18 or 19. And then I took a class in philosophy, and it was just, everything. And I remember, first week, I started asking you questions like, how do you know that? How do you know that? Well, how do you know that? And I remember hearing a phrase about the Munchausen trilemma and issues like that. And it was just like, all of a sudden you realize, like, well, what do I know? How do I know it? And that sort of thing. And then you sort of come to learn that there's a history behind the contemplation of these problems. And some of them have really elegant solutions, and there's language choices you have to adopt to be able to come to understand these things. And some of them we just have to come to accept that for as long as we've been pondering them, there isn't a formula you can write on a piece of paper to solve some of these problems. That's why it's so weird to encounter some of these presuppositionalists that seem to think that when they point out to you that you don't have a foundation for one belief or another, a deductive foundation, I should say, that therefore your worldview is factually incorrect. And all the babies go out with all the bathwater. And therefore, the Christian worldview, specifically the modern evangelical worldview,
Calvinist particular.
That just lands right into place. It's a weird strategy.
Yeah, that's right. Well, there's so many things really. I mean, so the Saiten Bruggencate version of this kind of well, how do you know that? Like, is so far in the wrong direction. It's so much more coarsely grained than the original Van Til. I'm not a Van Til fan by any means, nor Greg Bahnsen, who is this kind of sort of childlike philosopher that is spouted as being like really important or something. This Greg Bahnsen, Gordon Stein debate that happened in like, I don't know, when was that, the 80s or 90s or something? Anyway, it's a famous debate where Greg Bahnsen pwns this guy by doing pre-sup on him or whatever. And that led to a lot of Seitan Bugenke kind of playlist of things that you're going to say to people. Oh, you're borrowing from my worldview, and oh, you lost the debate when you turned up. These types of crass phrases that they use. So look, Sai will say something like, how do you know that you're not just face down in a psych ward or something? Like, how do you know that you're not just dreaming? It's this kind of like Cartesian. Like, well, I mean, one way of responding to this is to say, well, if I am face down in a psych ward dreaming all this stuff, and I'm actually dreaming that you're asking me that question. So you're a figment of my dream. The problem that you're posing to me is a figment of my dream. You're not actually asking me that question. I'm not under any obligation to justify knowledge to you. Like, either I am being asked that question by you, in which case there is a certain thing, there's some kind of ground that we both stand upon that we're not calling into question, or I am face down in a psych ward and none of this is happening at all. Now, you pick which one you want to, he is like rallying a sort of thought experiment and thrusting at you as if maybe this is really true. How do you actually know that we're having this conversation right now? And that's an inappropriate usage of it. Man, you can contemplate what are the reasons that I can, like, what's my theoretical framework? How do I organize my beliefs, and what is knowledge and how does it work? And to do that, you're going to use kind of skeptical doubt as a tool. You're not actually, if somebody actually says to you, how do you know that I'm even asking you this question? It is, in a sense, self-refuting. Because if you're not asking me this question, then, I don't have to answer it. And if you are asking me this question, then at least that much is real, and we can rely on that. So there has to be a common ground for Sai's game to get any traction. And he's sort of standing on that, pretending that it's not there, it seems to me. It's a very shallow illusion.
I think that Ozzy has commented on this before, or maybe 6 or 7 months or so ago during the course of one of the shows. The problems that Sai throws at atheists are the same that he has to answer himself. Am I right, Ozzy? Do you want to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And Hogtiechamp was making the same point a few minutes ago.
I'm sorry. I was away.
While you're away. But yeah, there's this insistence that, how do you rule out the possibility that you're insane and hallucinating? How do you rule out the possibility that you're dreaming or something like that, or that you're in the matrix, and consequently you're disconnected from the facts in some systematic way, so that none of your beliefs about the world around you are actually correct? Is that, or how can you guarantee that your cognitive faculties are working properly? I mean, if your cognitive faculties are not reliable, if they're not working properly, then you can't trust in any of the inferences that you're making. You can't trust your memory, you can't trust your senses, you can't trust any of the inferences that you're making. I mean, that's a horrible predicament to be in. Well, yes, I mean, that's true. Wow. I mean, if that's the case, but, and of course I don't assume that my memory is systematically failing me, that I'm dreaming, that my inferential practices are unreliable. I do in fact take for granted that I am awake right now, that there's a mind-independent reality, that there are other minds out there, that deduction is truth-preserving, and so forth, right? So I do in fact assume all these things. So it's a fair question philosophically to say, well, why are you so confident about these things? Why do you proceed as if these things are true? Why do you proceed on the assumption that these things are true, right? Now, what they will try to do is say that if you turn the tables on them and say, well, wait a second, how do you solve this problem? That this is the tu quoque fallacy. There's a couple of things wrong with this. The first thing to say about this is that they're the ones boasting that they've solved these problems. So you don't get to say, I'm not allowed to ask you, how the hell do you solve these problems? How does positing your God get you out of any of these epistemological problems? Right? That's not an illegal or illegitimate move on my part. You're the one insisting that if I can't solve these problems and you can, that it behooves me to accept your worldview. Well, time for you to cash that check. You just wrote a blank check, and you need to do something about this. You need to actually deliver the goods. And what they will always do is say, hey, if I don't have to answer that. I've defeated your worldview. Your view is reduced to absurdity. You don't know that that you're not the only mind in existence. Why would I even bother talking? Look, that is all just obfuscation and temporizing. Those are all just excuses for not answering the damn question that they insist that they can answer. If they could answer, they wouldn't have to ask you a question. They could just lay it all out. This is how we know what we think we know. They wouldn't have to ask you, how do you know anything? They wouldn't need you in the room. They should be able to explain to us just as they explain among themselves. This is how we know what we think we know.
I have to say, I so agree with you, and I find it so frustrating. Not necessarily in regards to presuppositionalism, but also in other theistic questions. When the opening gambit that I receive is, I can prove God exists. And I say, okay, go on. And they say, let me ask you this question. And at that say, it's no, I'm not playing the game, because whatever answer I give is utterly irrelevant. And I don't know.
There's another point I wanted to make, if I could, on this business.
Please do, Ozzy. But there's one more argument which I think will be done in short form, and also a couple of comments from the audience that I want to deal with. So please do go on, Ozzy. But
okay, I'll be brief.
Be aware that we've probably got 15 minutes left.
Okay, I'll be brief on this. The Bible thumping wingnut, Tim, who's hosting this exchange between Alex and Matt Slick, that same fellow, like a year ago, posted a video asking a number of atheists the question, could you be wrong about everything that you know? Is there anything at all about which you're absolutely certain? And he posed this sort of as a general challenge, and he named me specifically, so I made a video. I mean, don't usually do response videos, but in this case, I thought, okay, he named me, and I think it's a question I can fairly address. I'll make a video. So I made a brief response, and one of the things I said in that video is, look, if you're asking me, could I be wrong about everything I think I know, okay, that's not the same thing as saying, could I be wrong about anything? To say that I could be wrong about any particular claim that I hold, I think is true. I'm willing to say I could be wrong about any particular claim, but could I be wrong about everything all at once? Well, think about what that would mean. What would it mean for me to be wrong about everything I think I know? It would mean that I don't even know the meaning of my words. Think of my lexical beliefs, my belief that the words you're using in your question mean what I think them to mean. Your question to me presupposes that I have some knowledge, that I have lexical knowledge, knowledge of the meaning of words. We can't even have this conversation. Right? This conversation presupposes that I'm in possession of knowledge. You are presupposing of me that I know things. And then you're asking me, well, wait a second. I mean, you're going to have to solve this problem yourself. And you're going to have to give me a reason to think why I don't have lexical knowledge. Your question presupposes that I have lexical knowledge. I couldn't get as far as understanding your words unless I did. So they are really playing by a double standard. They are constantly insisting that you may be able to answer difficult questions that they insist that they can answer, but they refuse to answer these questions themselves. They will never, not one of them, has ever delivered the goods on this. None of them, up and down. I have never read an account that actually defends how they know what they think they know, that can get around the kind of thought experiments, epistemic nightmare scenarios that they posit that we need to resolve. So that's what I would say.
That's just because you don't believe in God. Look, I've got one more argument, and I think this is going to be the easiest one to defeat. But I see we've got a couple of comments coming in. I'll discuss that at the end of the show. I think before the show, Alex, you were referring to this as the ontological argument, and I have to say I think this is the most batshit crazy argument I've ever heard. And so far
I love
as
it.
so far as my understanding of it goes, is if you could imagine something wonderful and great, then that exists. And if you could imagine the greatest of things, then that means that exists, and therefore God, by definition, being the greatest of things, means that God exists. Have I got it wrong?
No, I guess it could be phrased more carefully, of course, but that's
please
just
do.
the argument.
I'm the first year student putting his hand up in class at his first lecture.
Well, so I think the argument would be said something along the lines of, well, you start off with a definition of God, and if this is supposed to be an uncontroversial definition of God as being like the maximal being or something, one of greatest extent of all good things. So it really it relies upon this notion of a great making property. So and I don't find this very intuitive, but some people do, and it's required for this argument. So you could say something like I don't know, being courageous or something is a great making property because like having more of it makes you better. So something along those lines. I'm not sure that's quite describing it correctly, and then there are other properties like being being tall or something, whereas extending the tallness of you doesn't make you better. It's just kind of an arbitrary property that you happen to have. So when we say that God's the greatest possible being, so saying that he has all of the great making properties to their maximal extent. So he's the wisest, he knows everything, he can do anything, he exists everywhere. He's got all of these things just beefed out to their maximal proportions. And you're saying, well, if we just define him in that way, it seems plausible to stick existence in with this pile of great making properties. So it couldn't be that he doesn't exist, because that needs to be one of those. It's better to exist than to not exist. A great being that just didn't exist would be worse than anything that does exist. Imaginary Sherlock Holmes is a wonderful detective, of course, but he can't solve any actual crimes. The bumbling idiot detective that I've got down the road from me is better, even if he only solves one crime in his whole life, than Sherlock Holmes, because he never actually does anything real. So the existence is a great making property, it seems, and so this argument goes. So God must exist if, by definition, you're just saying he's this maximal greatness property, the maximal greatness entity, and that it must be that part of the things that it has is existence. Therefore, God exists. That's the argument, essentially. So what you have to do supposedly what you have to do to deny this is to deny the definition. But then it seems like it's just, it should be open to the theist to define God the way that he wants to. It's just he happens to define it in this way, and it just happens that it leads to the thing that happens to exist by necessity or something. I think that's where. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And if I had started first year undergraduate philosophy and put my hand up to the professor, to you, and received a response like that, I would have immediately thought about changing courses, because I just think it's just such. I'm terribly sorry to use the word. It's such absolute crap, and I just don't think it's worthy of discussion. But I'm going to give the opportunity to Hogtie and Ozzy to respond in relation to that argument before I take the question that I said that we would take, and then be bringing the program to a close in about 10 minutes time. So Hogtie and Ozzy, do you want to respond? Was it I always mispronounce the name, Amsel or someone in the 10th
Anselm.
10th century? And William Lane Craig is still using this argument today.
It's 11th century, I believe. William Lane Craig doesn't use the ontological argument very much. I don't know that I've ever heard him use it, actually.
I've heard him use it, but he uses Alvin Plantinga's version.
The modal version.
Yeah.
I was wondering if
sorry.
Well, I was just wondering if you were familiar with the first source I'd heard it from was Matt Dillahunty, and I'm still having difficulty nailing down whether he said this as a joke or not, but I just found it really funny. Have you heard his version where he says, we're looking for this maximally great being? He says, well, what's more impressive? What would be a greater God? A God that exists and was able to create the world, or a God that doesn't exist but was able to create the world anyway? I'm much more impressed by that one. Therefore, God doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Well, my wife insists that a grape making property is being chocolatey. So God has to be chocolatey, otherwise he's not maximally great. But actually, I take a slightly different view. I don't think that the ontological argument is ridiculous. I think it's wrong. I think it's fallacious in a number of points. Some of the points that Alex has already raised, I would agree with. There are other things wrong with it. But I think it is a really clever argument. It is, of all the arguments that try to prove that God exists, as opposed to lend support for believing that God exists, but to actually try to establish conclusively that God exists on deductive grounds, I think is the most ingenious one of all. I love it. It's delicious. I mean, when I was in university and I was teaching this stuff, I loved teaching that argument because most people's, just fuses start to blow in your head when you start hearing this argument and you think, wait a minute, something's got to be wrong. And where most people think it's wrong is not where it's wrong. People will say like, oh, well, that's just defining God into existence. Well, no, it's not. It sounds like that, but that's not what's going on with that argument. So there are things wrong with it, a lot of things wrong with it, but it's not where, what's wrong with it is not what people think it is. And if anyone's interested in why I think this is an ingenious argument and wants to hear it sort of articulated in full, along with things that are wrong with it, over a year ago, I was in a little discussion group online called Sophia ex Nihilo, and we had a discussion about St. Anselm's Proslogion, which is the work where he puts forward the ontological argument. And I'll provide a link, but you can just look up Sophia ex Nihilo, Anselm's Proslogion. There were about 4 of us discussing it. We had a wonderful time discussing it. We tried to present it as fairly as possible. We weren't just trying to trash it. We were trying to find the sense in it, and we had a really nice, interesting discussion. It's a 2-hour-long discussion, but if you're curious about why someone like me, who obviously does not agree with it, thinks it's ingenious and clever, check out that video. I think it'll be worth your while.
We will include it in the link in the description. As you'll see, if something goes terribly wrong, it's because I've got one. Don't get near that keyboard. If we suddenly go off air, it's because this cat has put its little troublesome paw somewhere. Right, sit down and behave. Look, it's been absolutely fascinating, but I think it's only fair to raise a question. And the rumpus, I'm sorry, I don't have time to put forward your point because we're coming towards the end of the show. But I did want to throw this one out there, which is not quite on topic, but I think is an interesting question. And Alex, I can assure you, people are saying, please get Alex back on the show again. They've been enjoying it. So I'll throw this one out to you to kick off with. Does God's omnipotence, including knowing all about the future, preclude free will?
Well.
I know Alex says no. What would Ozzy and the rest of you say? I can throw in my tuppence worth, which isn't really my tuppence worth. It comes from actually Don Exodus when we had this conversation many years ago on the show. And his argument, which I think is a valid one, is that even if God knows everything, it doesn't preclude free will. All it means is that he knows how you'll exercise your free will. That's my answer, but hey, you don't want to hear from me. Alex?
So my answer is that God's foreknowledge doesn't preclude free will. But I already hold the view that there's a truth about what's going to happen anyway. So I think that it's quite a complicated thing to explain, but I'll try and be brief as brief as I can. So I'd say something like, if you make a prediction like, let's say you pick a horse in the horse race and you say, I don't know, let's call him Hogtie, for instance, and say Hogtie is going to win the race, right? Then I think that either what you've said now is true or false, even though the race hasn't happened. And I think it's problematic to try and hold that prediction is neither true nor false. Basically, because if once it happens one way or the other, and you have to look back at your prediction, and it was either true or false at the time. So when I say I don't know which way it's going to be, but it is true or false now, and that means that there is already a truth about the future. It's just an unknown truth. But that doesn't mean that it's not possible for another horse to win. There's no reason. It's not like a necessary truth, like a mathematical truth or something, which has to be that way. The laws of physics don't determine which horse is going to win. So there, it's still perfectly legitimate to say it's physically possible that a different horse will win, but the horse called Hogtie is going to win. Right? It is true that it will win, but it's possible that it won't win. Like it might not win, but it will win. And I think that then, if you already accept that, saying, well, God knows that it's going to win, and it's still physically possible that it might not, doesn't add anything to it. God knows something is entirely coextensive with it being true. That, you know,
Alex, can I ask a question? And given the time, I'm going to rather impolitely invite you to answer it either yes or no. I'll give you one sentence to justify it.
Okay.
Do you actually think that we have free will?
Damn, it's really hard to answer that question in a yes or no.
No, I gave you a yes or no with plus one sentence, and it could be a long sentence with lots of hyphens and commas.
Yes.
I'm not gonna do a slick on you. You can have as many commas as you want in your sentence.
He's a compatibilist.
I guess I am, broadly speaking, a compatibilist. So yes, I think that's the case, right? I think there can be.
So the answer is yes.
If you like, yes. Okay, let's do that.
And then you've got a sentence to justify.
Well, I'm not trying to advocate a particular theory of what free will is. I don't know whether maybe, I couldn't explain to you what the mechanism was behind it. I couldn't flesh that out in any way. I'm more confident in saying something like this, leaving will out of it. I think that it can be open. It's possible, say, that the coin will land heads, and it's possible that the coin will land tails. It's open which way the coin will land. But it's still going to be true one way or the other now, before I flip it, that it'll land, say, heads. And I think that free will is a type of problem that's exactly similar to that. It's just a more complicated one. But I think that because there's no logical problem at the basis of it, there's not going to be one when you make it more complicated later on. So that's my answer.
There were quite a few commas in that answer.
Hogtie. Semicolons.
I appreciate it. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be rude to you. It's just that I think it's best for us to keep the shows down to 2 hours. I think inviting an audience to sit and listen or watch a show more than 2 hours is asking too much for them. Hogtie, do you want to address the original question, or do you want to address the question of whether we have free will?
The free will.
And I will give you the equal opportunity to have an additional sentence.
I definitely don't want to address the free will question. I once had seen a video of Christopher Hitchens ask that question, and he says, of course I believe in free will. I feel as if I have no choice but to do so.
I think
and
the
that
actual
part
quote,
of my brain,
I think the actual
you got
quote,
it?
I think the actual quote is something along the creator demands that I do.
Oh, was that in there? Oh, that would totally change what I was going to say. But yeah, no, when that came up, I don't even know what free will is. It's not a conversation.
Here's a challenge for you: yes or no, one sentence, and as many commas as you like, which should take us up to about 15 minutes, I think.
Well, okay. To the first one, does God's foreknowledge preclude free will? I would say it depends entirely on what you think knowledge is and what you think free will is. There are versions of omnipotence. There are definitions of omnipotence that don't imply that God has knowledge of the future. There are theories that say that knowledge of the future is impossible. Alex was articulating a view that says nope, that view's off limits. So I mean, it depends entirely on what you think omnipotence and omniscience imply, and what you think free will is. So I can't answer the question unless I have some more precise definition of what you mean by free will and omniscience or foreknowledge. With respect to the other question, free will, yes, I think we have free will. I don't really worry too much about the word free. I think we have a will, but I'm a compatibilist, which is to say that I believe that we have a will. You can call it free. You have to ask yourself, free to do what and free from what? And but if you're a compatibilist, it means you also accept determinism. That is, you believe that that your decisions and your thoughts are themselves caused, that they are occasioned by actual prior causes, and I think that's true as well. So I'm a compatibilist. I suspect Alex sees it somewhat similarly.
We are gonna go on, Alex, very quickly.
I don't see. I'm not a determinist. I'm a compatibilist in the sense that I think that it can be. There can be a truth about what's going to happen, even when it's indeterminate what's going to happen. So I'm a different type of compatibilist to you in that case.
Okay, no, I'm not a determinist. I mean, I'm obviously not a strict determinist, because if I was a strict determinist, I wouldn't be a compatibilist. But what I mean is, but you do think that there are antecedent causes for what we will, do you not?
Well, I don't know, but I'm saying that even if there aren't, I still think that there's a truth about what's going to happen, an uncaused truth, and I think that truth alone doesn't stop you being free. That's my point.
I know. Okay, I'm going to
now the fight's going to break out.
The last word to Hogtie, because I sense we're stepping into territory that could fill up an entire show. Hogtie, your last comments, and then I'm going to bring things to a close, if I may.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the thing that they were going to go to blows to use our bad language budget for the whole episode on the whole free will issues. Get a couple of philosophy grads on that topic. I'll be hosting an after show. I'll post the link. I normally post it ahead of time, but there's a recent Google bug that forget it, whatever. Just check my Google Plus feed, and you'll find a link to watch and a link to join. We'll try to keep it to an hour or 90 minutes or so, but all are invited. With of course, you gentlemen get in first if you're inclined to drop by, and of course the audience welcome to pop in anytime.
That would be great. Thank you very much. As I say, with great thanks to everyone that's been involved, the people on the panel, Alex especially, as a first time on the show. As I say, I've been receiving positive comments. A couple of things I would like to say before I wrap up. Firstly, a comment made very much earlier on, I think even before the show started, there was no G+ notification. The reason is because I'm just useless. Ozzy, I know, can talk me through it. So for future shows, there will be G+ notifications. Secondly, I normally would have Twitter on, but because I'd not done the show for the best part of 2 to 3 months, I completely forgot about it. I completely forgot about giving Twitter notifications. That will be sorted out. Thirdly, people want to get involved. Some people want to actually call in the show. The reason there's a difficulty with that is because once I set things up with a Skype call, if I add someone else, all the images go out of place and whichever, which is why the rumpus I wasn't able to take you as caller. I'll think about that and see what we can do about that. You can also follow us on Facebook, and I'll put notifications out about future shows on Facebook as well. And finally, just to remind you, as I say, we have set up a Patreon account, and it is, as I say, a Patreon account with a difference. That is to say, none of us receive any of the income whatsoever. All of it is donated to Aussie, MSF, in French, as you would say it. You can't speak. Can't speak. Oh, I see. MSF / Doctors Without Borders. So we'll see you in 2 weeks' time, and thank you very much for watching. As I say, I hope to include all relevant links in the description of the YouTube video as soon as they've been sent to me. I know in particular people are wanting to know about Alex's contact details, his blog site, his website, or YouTube channel, or whatever. I'll include all of that as soon as I can. Very much like to hear from you in relation to who you'd like to see on the show. We're going to try and get a sort of like new person on every show from now on, and what topics you would like to have us discuss. But for now, thank you very much indeed for watching. I'm going to bring it to a close in the press of a couple of buttons. Gentlemen, please do stay with us for a few moments after I've